Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. This is Understanding the Legalities of Buying a Home Overseas. I'm Abbie Young, I'm our Digital Channel Manager here at Your Overseas Home, and I'm delighted to be joined once again by my colleague Julian.
Hi, I'm Julian. I'm one of the content writers here at Your Overseas Home. I've written a lot of the content that we've used as the basis for this webinar. And so, yeah, I've spent a lot of time researching the legal side of buying property abroad. And hopefully we can elucidate and make things a bit easier to understand today.
Yeah, definitely. If you don't know already, this is actually the fourth session in our series on how to buy a property overseas. If you missed last month, we talked about how to set a realistic budget. And on before that, we talked about how to pick the right location for yourself. If you missed any of those, you can head to the on-demand section of our website and watch those back. But today we'll be covering the buying process and the legal considerations that you need to be aware of in today's session. I think most of you are probably aware of who we are, but as a quick reminder, if you are new to Your Overseas Home, we basically produce guides, we offer free consultations, we run things like these webinars and our virtual events, all in the effort to help you buy your dream home overseas. So if you need anything from us, don't worry to get in touch. Our contact details will be at the end of this session, so you can reach out to us if you'd like any one-to-one support. And additionally, if you have any questions during this particular webinar session, you can use the question tab on the right-hand side of the screen. To get us started and to get everyone kind of using that, it'd be great if you could let us know where you're joining us from, what country you're in, which area you're in, so that we can get an idea of where everybody is from today. Yeah, and then we actually have a poll as well to start things off today. We kind of want to hear from you guys. What's your biggest concern when it comes to the legal side of buying a property abroad? So we've got a couple options here: understanding the local legal process, avoiding scams or developer issues, inheritance and succession laws, tax implications, and knowing which professionals to trust. I think for me, it's knowing which professionals to trust. I have bought a flat before and kind of followed everyone my estate agent recommended, and then had a bit of a panic right towards the end that maybe they weren't necessarily the right people for me. And I kind of wish I'd gotten a few more opinions. So I don't know. I think that's my biggest one. Julian, what kind of do you think about yours?
I think for me, it's going to be the avoiding scams and developer issues, mainly because it's like buying a house is a complicated process wherever you're based in the world, and certainly if you're buying it domestically. But if you're then buying it abroad, it's just that sort of thing where like you're working with so many people you don't know, with like sort of the processes which are different to what you might find at home. And so it's just that sort of fear that there'd be some obvious glaring sign I'm missing, which I might, I need someone basically on my side who's able to tell me you're trying to buy an unbuilt house here, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. And it's great to hear where everyone is from today. We've got lots of different people joining from lots of different areas. Just going to shout out Shirley though, because she's from Halifax, which is where I'm from as well. So good to see a Yorkshire local joining this one too. Perfect. We'll probably circle back to your guys' answers towards the end of this and kind of make sure that we've kind of tailored them to your kind of biggest concerns. But this session is kind of going to be an overview of all of the kind of main countries we cover and the legal considerations that you need to think about. Now, most of them have a fair amount in common. Little things vary country to country. However, there are some kind of common legal considerations that you want to be thinking about. Firstly, and the one that you will have heard us say if you've been to any of these before, always use an independent lawyer. You don't always want to solely rely on an estate agent's recommendation. Their job is ultimately to sell the property, and it's not necessarily to protect you and your needs. So always try and speak to someone who's independent there. Again, you're buying in a country that is not the UK or the US, if that's where you're from. So language barriers are probably going to be fairly common. The contracts may be translated for you, but the legal meaning of some phrases might not translate properly. If you've got someone who, you know, speaks both languages really well, they can explain it to you in, you know, kind of UK jargon, instead of just having to you kind of guess based on a, you know, contract that's been processed through Google Translate or something like that. So that's always a thing to be aware of across all of the countries. Also, for post-Brexit buyers in every single country, there are now rules in place that mean you cannot just freely move over there. So most of them have a limit on how long you can stay. It's pretty much always 90 days in a 180-day period if you are not from the EU, so if you're from the UK, for instance. And so then you'll probably have to go through some sort of residency application to be able to move there for a longer period of time. And finally, you know, the due diligence on the property, that's things like checking title deeds, unpaid debts on the property, and that all of the existing buildings are legal and, you know, not just kind of built there with no planning permission. You might be the one who kind of gets the stick for that in the end. So those are kind of the things to keep an eye out for across every country.
Yeah, it's really worth not underestimating that final bit in particular about when it comes to planning permissions, because it may be something which, say you're based in the UK, you're quite familiar with going through property searches when you're buying a property, seeing if something's been legally erected and like it's been, the kitchen's been extended in a way which is actually fine and great. Other countries, different planning laws. It might be a thing where it's like actually that someone has managed to live with something, some extension to their property for the last 10 years. It's never come up as an issue, but they've never got that original planning permission. Also, one in the UK, those sort of you can go onto your council website and find planning applications, and there's some pretty good systems in place that'll find that information. That's not necessarily the case in every country you might be looking to buy in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I had that with my flat in the UK. I live in a conservation area, and one of the windows had been changed without planning permission. You actually can't do that. But thankfully, because I could read everything, I was able to understand that and recognise that. And me and my sister kind of dealt with that ourselves. And it was something really easy to fix. If I hadn't have known that and the council had noticed, it was a really, really hefty fine that would have been on my back, even though I didn't change the window. So it's definitely something to be aware of. Okay, let's start then with buying a property in France. So France is an interesting one. There's kind of two sort of steps that you need to think about. So your first step will be signing the compromis de vente. This is a preliminary contract. It's kind of like putting an offer down, I guess, in the UK. But you do have a 10-day cooling off period. So if anything changes and you realise you're not quite happy with the property, or you've changed your mind, or maybe your situation changes in the first 10 days, you can withdraw and you'll still get something like your deposit back. If it's post the 10-day period, you are effectively locked into that purchase. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you can't change your mind, but it does mean that your deposit, for instance, might be at risk and you may not get that back. And then your second step is effectively like the completion here in the UK. It's the acte de vente, and this is your final contract, and you have to sign this at the notaire's office. So that's a really important element on the French side, that there are these two quite defined steps there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another aspect you need to be aware of when you're buying in France is that it's a legal requirement that you use a notary. A notaire is not a lawyer. They're basically a neutral government officer who works between both the buyer and the seller to make sure that all the documents are being signed officially. If you want an extra protection, well, you don't legally need to have a lawyer when buying a property in France. We would highly, highly recommend you do get a lawyer. As we'll say multiple times through this, like the lawyer is the person who is in the room, who is on your side. There's going to be lots of people you deal with when buying a house, but it's actually only really the lawyer who's going to be the one who forever is looking out for your best interest, because you're paying them directly. I would also say, if you look through our YouTube channel, you'll be able to find a previous talk that we've had where we had a French, he was an English lawyer who's also a qualified French notary, and he explains a lot of the process about what it is that he does. If anyone gets in touch after this, we're about to send them a link to that. Also, the other thing you need to be aware of when buying in France is its inheritance laws. Forced heirship is this process which means that your children may automatically inherit, regardless of what you've written in your will. That obviously may be something which you do want, but also it may be something which you don't. Not for any malicious reasons. You just might have quite an explicit will, and you don't want it to be controlled by the government. You want it to be what you've stated with your lawyer. So again, this is something which you need to look into when you're buying in France. It's something you need to talk over with your lawyer, just to have them explain it to you in full detail.
Yeah, definitely. I think France is one of those where we have a lot of the lawyers we work with are English, and then registered in France. And I think it's not too dissimilar, but there are just a couple things that you have to kind of make sure you're aware of. There can be a few kind of little things that can just trip you up. So always worth kind of getting a feeling. And as Julian mentioned, with all of these countries, this is an overview of everything. We have detailed webinars from various different lawyers. We've got notaries in some, all kinds of different contacts have talked through the legal process in a lot more detail. So this is just your kind of starting point, and if you need anything more, you'll be able to get that from our on-demand section, which, like Julian said, I'll be linking later. Okay, now Spain. So Spain is clearly quite a lengthy one. You can kind of see from the difference between France and Spain. There are a few more things that you just really need to have in place. So firstly, you need to make sure that you have a NIE number. This is your mandatory Spanish tax identification number. It's kind of like your national insurance number. You also then will need to set aside a reservation contract. This is a small deposit, usually about 10%, which allows you to reserve the property, and this will take the property off the market. You can then, once you come around to the, there's then potentially a private purchase contract that might be needed, which will be if you're doing, of course, the purchase privately. And then following that, you would have your final completion. This happens at the notary office, and then the sale is officially registered. Very similar to France. In fact, most of the countries have the same kind of completion process in place.
To sort of return to what I was saying before we started looking at different countries about sort of make sure that sort of planning laws have been properly followed and that sort of thing. Weird quirk about Spain is that quite a lot of rustic properties aren't legally built. It's a surprisingly common thing where someone has essentially built a structure on land that they own, and so they've never actually got the planning permission for it. This is very much this thing where it's like, if you're going to be buying a rustic property, you have to do extra legal due diligence to make sure that everything about that property is properly up to code. Again, it's something which you will be working with your lawyer. This is where they will absolutely earn their keep. But if it's something which worries you, then maybe just consider sticking to the urban areas. It's just the sort of thing where it's like, if it's an urban space, it's had a lot more scrutiny on how it's been built, that everything's properly registered. You can't really sort of sneak up a house in the center of a city, whereas you can if you've got a big tract of land out in the countryside. For off-plan properties, do also insist on a bank guarantee before paying deposits. It's just that sort of thing where you want to have that extra level of protection. You are buying an unfinished property, and you want to make sure that you are protected at every stage of the journey.
Yeah, definitely. If the agent you work with, or if you're buying directly through the developer, if they mention something called a segura, that means you know you're all good. This is like an escrow in the US. That usually means that your deposit has been put somewhere. That means it's not being used to pay for the building of the property. That's the key thing. It might be kind of a little bit uncomfortable to ask, but it's one of those things that's worth just checking, especially if you're working directly with a developer. Just check that your deposit isn't being used to fund the building of the property, and that they actually have the funds to do that themselves. And if you feel uncomfortable, your solicitor can do that for you, and they'll also probably be able to tell you if the developer that you're trying to buy from might not be quite the right ones to buy from. They'll often ward you away. In fact, a few of our solicitors have warned people away from certain properties just because they've taken one look and said, absolutely not. So it's worth having it just for that. Okay, so Portugal, I think very similar to Spain really here. It's very similar, almost the exact same name for their tax codes as well. So it's your NIF number. again, like national insurance. You have a promissory contract, about a 10% deposit, and then the final deed is signed at the notary. It's pretty much the same process, but again, it's just kind of about following those steps and making sure that everything is safe and secure, and that you feel kind of comfortable with the situation.
Similarly, as well, as we're saying, do be aware of if you're buying rural property, make sure everything is properly signed off, and you're going to need to make sure that your lawyer is doing those searches, that you are getting those documents. Do ask for copies of the documents. They may obviously come through in Portuguese, but it's a thing where it's like, at least you can see that they've been produced. You can obviously go to talk you through what it is that they've sent you. You can then go to Google Translate yourself if you want to double check. But it's just that sort of thing where it's like, get that paperwork for anything which is going to be outside of a city. And then also the other thing you need to watch out for is if there are any debts on the property. Again, this is something which your lawyer is going to be looking for. But debts in Portugal are left to the property, not to the seller. So, for instance, if someone has taken out loans to build extensions on a property, that will be tied to the property rather than to the seller. At the point that they've moved on, you could then become liable for those costs. It's just something which you need to make sure that your lawyer is checking out, and there are certain things which you should be looking at when you're looking at a building, where it's sort of like, that's some expensive work that's been done. Can I check that it's all been paid off, or that there is something within our contract to make sure that that cost remains with the seller? But yeah, this is as we were saying with Spain, very much where the lawyer earns their fees.
Yeah, definitely. But hey, it's worth it. I think I'd rather spend a little bit of money, spending a few £100,000. It's worthwhile spending that extra couple grand, just to make sure that you're not buying something that in the future is going to ruin your life, is maybe a far too strong of a phrase, but you certainly don't want to, be kind of stressed once you've just bought a home in a beautiful new country. Okay, Italy. Also, I think we're kind of all getting the rhythm here. It's pretty similar from my end. Most of what Julian's talking about kind of differs country to country, but I'm going through the processes for you. So Italy, I will say, is probably the one where there are perhaps the most kind of grey areas and intricacies from region to region that are just slightly more complicated. And I think having a solicitor on your side who is aware of all of those is kind of the best thing. In terms of the process, you need to get, again, a tax ID. You will do the compromesso, which is your binding agreement. The deposit is usually 10%. It can be more in Italy, again, depending on the property type, depending on the region, things like that. It can potentially go up to 30%. But I would say we mostly see 10% deposits. And then you sign the final deed as well, again, before a notary. So it's really, that final step is pretty much the same every single time.
Abbie did say that my stuff was changing from slide to slide, but actually,
and it's not on this one.
The issue with Italy is you do need to look for unlicensed extensions. It's not unknown for there to be sort of balconies added, terraces added to roofs. Everyone's looking for that little bit of extra space, but sometimes entire rooms have been added to a property. It may be that these have been done entirely to code, and brilliant. You've then got yourself a home with a balcony, you've got a home with a terrace, you've got a home with an extended kitchen. But if you see these sorts of works, just make sure they've been checked. And it's very much that sort of thing where it's like, you start with the bones of the house, you've got sort of the essentials of a kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, hopefully living room as well. But like, it's sort of, if you start seeing those nice added extras, you just see it as a bit of a flag to check. Like, it's got a balcony, that's a wonderful thing. I will just make sure that it's been done to standard, because it could cause you an absolute headache later. Your lawyer will be able to check that these are legal. That is very much their job, and they will be, if they're a good lawyer, already primed to go and do it. But it is something where you want to have that conversation with someone when you're going through the searches phase. Also verify that there are no unpaid utility bills or local taxes. Again, this isn't necessarily the same as Portugal, where it's like sort of the debts are actually held onto the property, but it's just that sort of thing where it's like, you want to make sure that there's not going to be some sort of surprise after you've completed where you become liable for some previously unpaid debt.
Yeah, definitely. And you can see here, we've made a little note here just on the lawyer being optional. I think that's something just to really point out here. A lot of the contacts you will speak with will tell you, a lawyer is not needed in Italy, it's not necessary, the notary can do a lot of this. That's not really the case. The notary is literally there to make sure the contracts are done, and that is pretty much the extent of what they'll do for you. You will hear a lot of people saying it's not necessary. A lot of times that's because obviously getting a solicitor involved can slightly slow down the process, because they will be being very thorough and it's not just gathering contracts together. But I think we couldn't probably recommend it more strongly if we tried. I think Italy is one of those where there are quite a few things that you need to be aware of. Like Julian mentioned, people will just build balconies for the fun of it. And so, yeah, I would always say you'll probably, if you're buying in Italy, you'll hear a lot of people tell you a solicitor's not necessary, and they may tell you it's a waste of your time. I would honestly kind of ignore that and get yourself a solicitor, just to be on the safe side. Same really with Greece as well. I think, it's a beautiful destination, but there are also kind of a fair few, grey areas in some of the kind of building and things like that. Again, in terms of the legal steps, you need a tax code, that's an AFM in Greece. You also in Greece oftentimes will definitely need your Greek bank account already set up. We would usually say in most countries you can do power of attorney, and your solicitor will simply be able to open a bank account up for you. But oftentimes in Greece it's completely required. So again, you can use power of attorney, and that kind of goes for every country. And again, your notary will finalize your sale, but the lawyer is who ensures everything about the property is, debt free, the due diligence has been done. So they kind of do, they do different things and that work kind of hand in hand, that are valuable if you're trying to buy a home overseas.
I mean, just to clarify as well, if you've not come across the term power of attorney before, it's very simple. It's basically that you have enabled your attorney to act on your behalf. It means that they can do things like open bank accounts for you. They can sign documents for you. Once you've found a lawyer that you trust, if you're not able to be traveling over to Greece or wherever it is you're buying regularly, this is a great way to make sure that the property purchase is still going ahead in your absence. You will have a conversation with your lawyer at the point of setting up power of attorney, and they will tell you what things they won't do on your behalf and what things they will do. There will always be points when you do need to actually go out to the country and be present for certain aspects, but there is a lot of it which can be handed off to the lawyer, and that's a really helpful thing. The other thing which is unique to Greece is these things called border zones. It's certain places where non-EU citizens, it's not that they're not allowed to buy, but they have to get certain permits. So if you're an EU citizen, it's not an issue. Everywhere in Greece is available to you. But if you are a non-EU citizen, then there's certain areas, so the Greek island of Rhodes, for instance, counts as a border area. You would need to go with your solicitor to get a permit. It's not an impossible thing. It's just sort of an extra step for a non-EU citizen.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, moving on to Cyprus, which is just the most similar to Greece in a way. We've kind of highlighted here, I think this is something that comes up a lot. We personally only cover buying in the south of Cyprus. That's because, of course, the north is a disputed territory, and so the legalities of that are perhaps slightly more complex. I don't think we need to get too political on here, but it kind of is this, to give you an idea, this legal steps is based on the south side of Cyprus, so the Greek side, which is legally secure for international buyers to purchase in. So that's kind of just a flag there for everybody. You do tend to need permission to buy, but it's a formality. It's a legal requirement, but it's more of a formality than anything else. I don't think many people are getting necessarily turned away. And your contract has to be lodged at the land registry within 2 months. And I know Julian will go in a little bit more on title deeds, but title deeds are the biggest flag in Cyprus. And if you have been on any property portals, whether that's ours or other ones, you will see a lot of the properties in Cyprus will say, 2-bed apartment with title deeds. So that's, if you're wondering what that is, Julian's going to have a little bit of a chat about that, I think, next.
Just a little bit. So, and yeah, a title deed is something which you will encounter in other countries, but it's particularly important to Cyprus. It's less of an issue now than it was maybe 10 years ago, but like where essentially properties weren't listed, that they had title deeds, didn't have title deeds. People would get into the purchase process and not realize that while they were buying the property, they weren't buying full ownership of the property. Now it is much clearer, but also you just need to talk to your lawyer about it, make sure they're seeking these things out, making sure they get them signed for the property. Essentially, it's really where your independent legal advice is going to be critical. This is where someone is going to just completely and utterly for your comfort be able to tell you that you are buying the full rights to this home. And as Abbie was saying, listings will often state whether a title deed issue has already been resolved, but you'll still need your lawyer to confirm this, even if it is saying in the listing that it's there. It's just something which you need to be aware of.
Yeah, definitely. I know that was quite a lot to kind of hear from us. We've kind of done a quick run through every country. So just a kind of quick summary here on side by sides. Pretty much you need a tax ID in every country. If you're looking to retire, you're going to need things like your visa and residency, which we'll head on to next. You will need to head to a notary at some point, but we always highly recommend a lawyer, and in Greece and Cyprus they are mandatory, so you need to have those. But again, independent legal advice is so strongly advised by us. I think it's the biggest thing we talk about at any one given time, is to speak to an independent lawyer. And then of course, like we mentioned, there are unique risks across each country. Spain, I think, is the one that most people remember, which is the rustic land. But things like forced heirship in France, if that's a bother for you, highlight that and have a think about if that was the case, would you want to buy in another country? These unique risks might change which country you choose to buy in. So hopefully this table kind of summarizes that. If you want to look back on this, this webinar will be on demand shortly after this, so you'll be able to kind of watch back and see if any of these things are a problem for you. And then very quickly, just on tax, residency, inheritance, things like that. Retirees, you need to make sure that you qualify for the visa in each country. If you've narrowed down to maybe 1 or 2 countries, you can head over and watch our longer discussions on visas and residency from our different contacts. Things like the Spain non-lucrative visa, they have a minimum income requirement from things like your pension or any other kind of passive income. If you don't meet those, there are kind of exceptions based on things like amount of savings, etc. But at that point, again, you're going to want to be speaking to a lawyer who can set you up with that, with the residency and things like that. So just something to flag. And of course, if you're planning to invest and rent out your property, rental regulations can be quite tight and quite difficult to work with, and particularly in Portugal. You've probably seen the headlines about Airbnbs in Portugal, so that's one to think about. And the inheritance rules differ wildly. So France and Italy are quite strict, Spain and Portugal are slightly more flexible. So just things to think about depending on what you plan to do, not just with your property maybe in the next couple of years, but perhaps with your property in the next 10 to 20 years as well. We're kind of short on time, but I think we've got a couple minutes to maybe run through some of the questions that we have in the chat here. I don't know if you want to pick a couple out, Julian, and we can see if we can answer these.
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm going to pick a question which I realise I don't know the answer to, which is a great way to start. But so just for the person asking if Crete is classified as a border zone, I don't believe it is.
I don't think so.
But I would absolutely double check. And like there are lists online. It's very clear, sort of breaking down where they are. I know like the Aegean Islands are, but I don't believe Crete falls into those. But it's quick search, you'll be able to find it out. It's basically just anywhere which is sort of like at the far extent of Greece's reach, and particularly where it starts moving closer to Turkey's territory.
Yeah, I think Crete is okay off the top of my head, but yeah, we can check back on that ourselves as well and let you know once we've got that answer for you. I'm noticing here Adrian's question about in Italy, you can have a surveyor check the plans. Adrian's question, is this sufficient or do you need a lawyer? I think, Adrian, if you haven't gathered from my incessant, you should have an independent lawyer that has run through this. I think, when it boils down to it, it is, of course, personal preference. No one is going to force you to have a lawyer. What a surveyor can do and the remit of what they can do is not as extensive as what a lawyer can oftentimes do for you. I personally would recommend one because they can check for things that are not just the planning permission and the state of the property, and they can check things like the depths that we spoke about. They can also, it's simple things you don't think of, like, great, you can have a surveyor. What if they don't put the documents in English? You could trust Google Translate, but I mean, the documents I got from my surveyor in the UK were confusing enough and I could not understand them. I couldn't imagine if I got them in Italian what I would have done. Frankly, I think I sent them to 30 people and asked them to read through them first. So, that's the kind of summary is our recommendation is to get a lawyer. And oftentimes lawyers will do a package for you that includes, surveying, conveyancing and residency and everything. So you're not necessarily going to have to go somewhere and get, 3 or 4 different contacts involved. They'll often do kind of a package deal for you that covers everything. So that's the considerations that I think are worth thinking about.
The other thing as well is that surveyors and, as Abbie's saying, surveyors and solicitors provide very different functions. But also, when it comes to surveyors, look at the legality of the extensions or the additional work that's been done to a property. They likely wouldn't want to be held accountable if they made a mistake on that front. They might be able to say it's like, this looks like it's been a legally done extension, but they wouldn't necessarily, because it's not their career, they may not want to stake that on their word. Whereas a solicitor, it is absolutely their job to work out whether these things are legal. And a surveyor who just can give you advice on that, it's not going to be the same standard. Similarly as well, they may talk to the quality of the work that's been done, but a really well done balcony may still be an illegal balcony. So again, it's just that sort of thing where it's like they can both talk to the same issue, but they might be coming up from different points of view, and it may not be what you need in the long run.
Yeah, definitely. Taking a look here at James's question, he says, one hears that it can take 6 months plus to buy a French house, but is that always the case? And conversely, how quick might a French purchase be if all goes well? The answer for this is the same across all countries. We've seen properties be viewed, offer put down, bought, moved in weeks. That can happen. It is a case of it's almost the opposite of how long is a piece of string. Sometimes it is literally how short is a piece of string. It can be very quick. It can also not be very quick. I would say on average in France, we see properties selling in about 6 months. It usually takes a few months to get things done. This is something we flagged as well last time. Depending on when you put your offer in, that can extend the length of time it takes for you to purchase the property. So if you put your offer in July 28th, let's say, you're not going to speak to anybody about your property until, honestly, a guess, September 12th would be my guess. August, pretty much every country is going to shut down. They do not work in August, or they work very limited hours. And so that can massively delay things. Same with if you put your offer in kind of in late December, they often will close for, quite lengthy Christmas hours. So those are all things to think about that can delay the length of time. I would always say expect that it's going to take 3 to 6 months on average. It can be quicker. It can be longer. If you're buying an off-plan property, of course, it can take 12 months plus, for you to finally complete, especially if the property hasn't, is in the very, very early stages. So that's kind of perhaps the most unhelpful answer, because the answer is, it depends.
Very much depends. There are some things you can look out for. So for instance, like if it's a resale property, then it likely will take longer than a new build property because you're going to have to do those surveys. You might be getting sort of various experts in. If you get information from the first survey where it's like, oh, you should get a timber expert in. If there's someone living in the house, then they maybe need to find the next place to move on to. You become part of a chain. Obviously, that will be a sign that makes something a bit longer. If you are aware of any disputes when you get early into the process, like it's sort of this, maybe it's a probate property that the person who previously lived there has left the property in their will to their family, and they're trying to work out how the sale is going to be processed. These are the sorts of things where it's like you might pick them up either from talking to the estate agent, talking to the seller if you are shown around the property directly from them, which might just give you a bit of indication that this is not going to be the swiftest of purchases. But as Abbie says, like there's no guarantees on any of this in terms of like how quick or long it's going to take. You might well find a resale property that moves quickly just because everyone's very motivated.
Exactly.
Don't put an offer into a house thinking we're going to move into it this summer. Don't make your plans around that sort of thing. House purchases take the length of time they take. It's just the fact of life, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a big asset. It takes a long time sometimes, and that's unfortunately the thing. Make your plans for next summer. I guess is our recommendation. Get excited for 2026. Right, before we wrap up, I've just noticed a question has come in from Gail, and she's asked, if buying in Spain up to £100,000, can it quote comfortably be said that all fees would be covered by 15% of the purchase price? Well, Gail, you're in luck. This was last month's topic. So the answer is we recommend 10 to 15%. If you'd like a detailed breakdown on how those look in Spain in particular, you can head over to the On Demand section and you can actually watch us kind of run through all of this. You can skip ahead to the Spain bit if you don't want to watch all of the countries. Although I think Julian and I had a great time reading all those numbers out. So feel free to head over there. What I will caveat quickly is up to 100k, your legal costs are usually a flat fee instead of a percentage of the property price. So when you speak to your lawyers, let them know your budget and they'll be able to let you know what their flat fee is. Normally, it's properties under 250k have a flat fee with them. So check with the lawyers, ask if it's percentage or flat fee for your budget, and they'll be able to figure that one out for you and let you know roughly what those would look like. I'm seeing lots of more questions coming in, and I know we're really kind of strapped for time now. So what I'll do, anybody who has asked a question in the last couple of minutes, I will get one of our property consultants to give you a quick call just to answer your question and make sure you're comfortable with the process and things like that. You can actually, I'm hoping we'll be able to put a link on the screen here. You can actually book a call back with them and they'll be able to chat through that. Quick summary though, what can you do next? We're going to be back again next month talking about the next kind of steps. You can also explore the archive we have of expert-led webinars. You can attend one of our upcoming virtual property shows. The next one is October 4th. And as I just mentioned, you can also book in with one of our property consultants as well. So feel free to use the links that are popping up on the screen if you would like to interact with us more. Hopefully we'll see all of you next month. And if you've enjoyed this session, please feel free to leave us a review on Trustpilot. It's been great kind of chatting with everyone and answering all of your questions. And yeah, goodbye from me. I had a great time today. Thanks for joining me again, Julian.
Awesome. And yeah, thanks very much. And goodbye from me as well. And remember, if you've got any questions, we are just an email away. Do reach out. We can, if not answer it directly ourselves, we can find out the answer for you.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks everybody for joining us and all of your questions. Hopefully we'll see everyone next month.